is to change absolutely nothing other than the name. But the name this time next week will be MS Now. All right. Thanks you at home for being with us this hour. Super happy to have you here. Tomorrow is Veterans Day. Veterans Day is not Memorial Day. Memorial Day is the very somber day when we remember and honor people who have sacrificed their lives for this country. Memorial Day happens in the spring. Veterans Day is tomorrow, and Veterans Day is celebratory. It is a not at all somber day where we celebrate with parades and parties and all different ways to honor American veterans, to celebrate them, to say thank you. So happy Veterans Day, Dad. Tomorrow, this Veterans Day, there's going to be a ton of protests against the Trump administration under the banner of Vets Say No. Tomorrow, protests are planned by veterans groups all over the country in at least 25 different states, everywhere from Alabama to Texas to North Carolina to Ohio, all up and down the West Coast, all throughout the Midwest. It's protests by both veterans and their supporters. The Veterans Day protest in Washington, D.C. tomorrow is going to be under the banner, Say No to War on Our Cities. The veterans groups organizing these protests say they're particularly focused on cities like Washington, D.C., which Trump has threatened with military occupation in one way or another. This weekend in Illinois at the Broadview ICE facility in Chicago, a group of mothers engaged in civil disobedience on the street outside that facility. They sat down and were arrested in protest of Trump's immigration agents last week, charging into a daycare in their full pseudo-military regalia, charging into a daycare and dragging out a daycare teacher in front of all the little kids at that daycare facility. Later this weekend, after the protest by moms, there was a silent protest at that same Broadview facility with women dressed from Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. We actually saw the same thing this weekend at the Minnesota State Capitol in St. Paul, Minnesota. There were protests this weekend in Waltham, Massachusetts. People marched to the Waltham District Courthouse, which they say is one of the courthouses that's effectively being used as a trap by Trump's immigration agents. People turn up there because they are compelled to as part of the immigration process or some other legal process, and then Trump's immigration agents lay in wait there to arrest people. Protests against Trump and his immigration raids also this weekend at City Hall in Santa Maria, California, also in Portland, Oregon, another place where Trump has tried to send troops. This weekend in Portland, saw doctors and other medical professionals protesting in their white coats. Also this weekend, a hilarious and very Portland protest of people in full 1980s style aerobics gear. They worked out for a full hour in front of the Broadview ICE facility. They said they were sweating out the fascists. Fair enough. You know what fascists hate? Leg warmers. Protests also this weekend in Bend, Oregon, and in Albany, New York. Fund SNAP, not ICE. In Atlanta, Georgia, protesters marched to the Georgia governor's mansion, telling Governor Brian Kemp to intervene in the shutdown disaster, to use state funds from Georgia to make up the difference in food stamp benefits for Georgia residents, while the Trump administration is refusing to fund SNAP. And, you know, after last week, where the Democrats just routed the Republicans everywhere and every way in every state where there were elections on Tuesday last week, I got to tell you, I really thought after those election results, I particularly thought that night when we were getting off the air after midnight on Tuesday night, after like 5 or 6 hours of election coverage, which was just relentlessly positive for the Democrats and relentlessly disastrous for the Republicans all night long. I really thought getting off the air on Tuesday night and looking ahead to these next few days that we might see something new and truly bananas from Trump in the immediate aftermath of those elections, right? Some kind of deliberately bizarre, shocking even for him, stunt to try to change the subject, to try to stomp on the tail of this story of total Democratic domination in last week's elections. But we saw just kind of the regular amount of craziness from Trump in the next few days. We got, Trump appearing to fall asleep multiple times in public, including at a televised event in the Oval Office. We got Trump flying out of Washington, again, at the end of last week to go to yet another weird party at his gold mansion in Florida. And this one didn't have the Great Gatsby Roaring Twenties theme that the last one had, but it did have synchronized swimmers. Synchronized swimmers for Donald Trump's amusement, dressed in American flag swimsuits, expertly splishing around to patriotic music for him. While his administration at that moment was rushing to the United States Supreme Court to get the court's help in their quest to not pay for food stamps anymore. So, I mean, it's not like Trump, in the wake of that election disaster for Republicans last week, it's not like he took great steps to try to repair his image, right, in the wake of the election results, to the extent that him sort of doing this Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake vibe hasn't really been working with him, with American voters. He's not taking any steps at all to improve that. I mean, Trump's approval ratings are as bad as they've ever been. In this latest CNN poll, his disapproval number is worse than where he was in the immediate aftermath of January 6th. Right? He's knocking down the White House so he can build himself a gilded ballroom. He's putting big golden decorations and like strip mall gift shop style gold cursive lettering all over what's left of the White House, turning it into something just really embarrassing. He's hosting these repeated, elaborate parties at his private club and going golfing and having the American people send $20 billion to Argentina because he says the Argentinian people are suffering, while he's literally fighting to keep food from the American people. His FBI director is charging the taxpayers for private jet flights to go visit his girlfriend. His defense secretary is bulldozing the military and then kicking generals and admirals out of their military housing so Trump's cabinet officials, like him, Pete Hegseth, can take those houses for themselves. Not just destabilizing the U.S. military, but essentially looting it for their own use. Trump administration paying ICE agents without interruption so they can keep terrorizing fricking daycares in Chicago, while they're refusing to pay air traffic controllers, which has resulted in more than 5,000 flights being canceled over the weekend and another 2,000 canceled just today. It's not like they're doing anything to shore up their image in the eyes of the American people. In the wake of last week's election results, Trump has not seemed to change course at all. Even when the polling last week showed that the public was blaming him and the Republicans for the ongoing shutdown disaster, even when the election outcomes in states where Republicans really want to be competitive, states like Virginia and Georgia and New Jersey and Pennsylvania, even upstate New York, election outcomes in all of those places less than a week ago showed Democrats not just winning everywhere, but winning by blowout, unprecedented margins and in every conceivable race, winning seats that they haven't held for decades. In some cases, winning seats they haven't held in a century. Now, after that electoral rout by Democrats less than a week ago, surprisingly, I admit I was wrong. Trump didn't do anything weirder than usual to try to step on the tail of that story, to try to change the subject, to try to make the triumphant Democrats look weak again instead of strong. He didn't do anything different. The people who really changed course, the people who intervened to change the story, to stomp on the tail of that Democratic victory and make the Democrats look weak and confused and divided and aimless, were, of course, the Democrats themselves. Democratic Senate leader Chuck Schumer could not hold his caucus together in the Senate. And so less than a week after those Democratic triumphs in that election, the worst week of Donald Trump's presidency, for some reason, 8 Democratic senators decided this was the right time to give up on the Democrats' previously sturdy and unified demand that Republicans needed to fix the disaster they just created for the American people in health insurance and in health insurance costs, they just decided to give up. And so now we are on track for the 41-day government shutdown to come to an end sometime soon, because Democrats inexplicably just gave in without any visible concessions from the Republicans at all. Certainly without any meaningful concessions. And that's the kind of behavior you might expect from a party that was at a low ebb in terms of its power and its standing with the American people. Instead, in this case, Democrats just worked their tails off to win these huge election victories all over the country last week, had unprecedented success, probably their best election outcomes in like a decade, right, in terms of across-the-board wins. Not to mention the fact that Americans urging Democrats to fight harder. Americans urging Democrats to stand up and take an even tougher stance against Trump and the Republicans. Americans just held one of the biggest protests in American history, bolstering the Democrats in this fight, telling them to fight harder, to not give in. The polls and the polling showed they were finally winning both the argument and the elections to prove it. And so 8 Democratic senators decided to cave in exchange for nothing. The vote in the Senate to end the shutdown on those terms is happening right now. We'll keep an eye on that vote as it unfolds, looking out for any potential surprises, although we don't have any reason to expect any. Democratic leader Chuck Schumer did oppose this deal and says he did not want the Democrats to cave. But you know what? Honestly, he may lose his leadership job in the Senate over this anyway. I mean, even if he did oppose this himself, he obviously could not hold his Democratic caucus together to keep these 8 senators from this bizarre side deal with the Republicans, which is bringing the shutdown to a close, with Democrats winning nothing for having done it. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont is rip-roaring on this issue, as you might imagine. He's going to join us live here from Washington in just a moment. We're also going to be joined live here tonight by Liz Oyer. She's a former Justice Department official who had a really important job in the Justice Department before Trump fired her. I will also say Liz Oyer happens to be one of those lawyers who can explain things so well. You want her to be like whatever the adult life equivalent is of your homeroom teacher. Like you want her to be the teacher of everything. Honestly, I think if Liz Oyer had been my math teacher, I'd be doing quadratic equations as a party trick to this day. I think that there is, she has a real talent for explaining complicated stuff. And I've asked her to be here with us tonight because there's a bunch of craziness and what really seems to me like a bunch of crazy failure that is unfolding this week on the legal front. Specifically, what appears to be some really bad lawyering inside the Trump administration. A bunch of these things is about to come sort of to a head all at once, all over the course of this week. And I want to know what it means and how it might change things going forward. Let me explain. Take, for example, Virginia. Eastern District of Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C., very important jurisdiction as a U.S. Attorney's Office. You might remember that they removed the U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia recently, and they instead installed a woman named Lindsay Halligan, who is a random Florida insurance lawyer and Trump fan who had never so much as prosecuted a traffic ticket. It's under Lindsay Halligan's estimable authority that U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Virginia brought federal criminal charges against former FBI Director James Comey for supposedly lying to Congress, and against New York Attorney General Letitia James for supposed irregularities in her mortgage paperwork. Now, the reason that I've got eyes on that this week is because, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, but this looks to me like it's about to blow up in their faces. And I say this, I don't mean to cast aspersions on the innate charm and abilities of somebody who's never prosecuted a case, who's suddenly in charge of one of the most important U.S. attorney's offices in the country. But on Thursday this week, Lindsay Halligan's going to be up against 2 real lawyers, two really big deal, very accomplished, famous, almost household name lawyers who are representing Tish James and James Comey in those criminal trials. The lawyers are Abby Lowell and Patrick Fitzgerald, two very famous lawyers. And this week, the two of them are going to be in court challenging the cases against James Comey and Tish James in the Eastern District of Virginia. And they're going to be challenging those cases in part on the basis of what the heck does this person, Lindsay Halligan, do? What the heck is this person, Lindsay Halligan, doing in that office anyway? They're essentially going to be challenging her appointment and her ability to bring these cases. If I was betting on Patrick Fitzgerald and Abby Lowell on the one hand and Lindsay Halligan, Florida insurance lawyer, on the other, I mean, I know what side of the bet I would take. Especially because the judge, in the Comey case at least, has already castigated Lindsay Halligan's handling of this case, has described it as effectively not just irregular, but buffoonish and wrong. And the judge is already calling on that U.S. Attorney's Office to justify their actions in ways that seem very damning for these cases. So I think those two cases may blow up, proverbially speaking, this week. When that court hearing happens on Thursday. And another reason this is worth watching this week in particular is a mysterious firing that happened last week. It didn't get a lot of attention, but this firing may become a lot less mysterious in the next few days. And the firing relates to, most specifically, the case against Tish James. So that's the mortgage irregularities case, right? You probably remember that that case appears to have originated with an obscure little federal agency that handles mortgage financing, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which nobody has ever had to think about ever before. Trump put a very MAGA Trump appointee in charge of that agency. And now in running that agency, he appears to have been using the data, the paperwork that that agency has access to essentially try to find crimes to prosecute against Trump's list of enemies. He has tried to do it with California Democratic Senator Adam Schiff and his mortgage, and with Fed Governor Lisa Cook and her mortgage, and also with New York Democratic Attorney General Tish James and her mortgage. Well, last week, little notice story from Reuters. This Trump appointee who runs this obscure mortgage data agency, who seems to have been the source for all of these weird criminal cases against Trump's political enemies. That guy, last week, fired the inspector general at that agency. Why did he fire the inspector general at his agency? We don't know. We have not matched this reporting. But Reuters says 4 sources told them that the inspector general received notice of his termination from the White House after he made efforts to provide key information to prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia. Quote, the information he turned over was constitutionally required, said 2 of the sources, while the third source described it as being potentially relevant in discovery. So this mortgage case against Tish James is going to be in court this week, in federal court. It's not going to be in the newspapers or in social media or at the White House podium. It's going to be in real court with a real judge who gets to decide if that Tish James case and the James Comey case are real cases or not. Or instead, are they pernicious abuses of power by people maliciously carrying out the president's personal and political vendettas? And if part of that is the inspector general trying to convey legally required information to the court, and that inspector general was blocked from doing so and then fired for doing so, well, you might expect that there's going to be hell to pay in that courtroom this week about that. And so I'm here for it. That's going to be happening this week, and we're going to have eyes on that. And I'm really curious as to what that might mean about the president's continued sort of revenge campaign against his political enemies, but also about the administration more broadly and whether or not they may get in trouble for some of the things they're trying to use the federal courts to do. I should say we are seeing similar types of chaos in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., also a very important U.S. Attorney's Office where Trump has installed a Fox News host as the U.S. attorney. Her name is Jeanine Pirro. She made a huge deal out of arresting the guy who became a folk hero and D.C. legend when he threw a limp Subway sandwich at immigration agents and then ran away. Pirro then failed to persuade a grand jury to bring felony charges against that man. She then failed last week to get a jury to convict him on even misdemeanor charges. He was acquitted. Well, now in that same office where Jeanine Pirro is really leading from the front, have fired that veteran prosecutor who led the fraud and public corruption unit in that office. Why did they fire him? Again, we don't know. But according to the New York Times, he reportedly pushed back on Jeanine Pirro's desire to pursue the kinds of cases Donald Trump wants against people like 95-year-old Democratic donor George Soros. She reportedly also wants to somehow relitigate the pro-Trump riot at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. I'm sure Jeanine Pirro will do great with those, especially given that they're already reportedly having to fire veteran prosecutors who are refusing to go along with whatever it is she's trying to do there. Now, tonight, MSNBC reports on chaos in another federal prosecutor's office. This one's led by another gung-ho MAGA appointee in the Southern District of Florida, which is not usually the world's most important U.S. attorney's office. But we learned over the weekend that that U.S. attorney's office has sent out a bizarre raft of dozens of subpoenas related to the investigation into Russia's efforts to help Trump's presidential campaign in 2016. Subpoenas now related to the Russia investigation from the 2016 campaign. Subpoenas now. I know it's always dangerous to do math on television, but let's do a little. It's 2025 now, so if you minus and then you carry the one. Yeah, 2016 is 9 years ago. 9 years ago. Even if you're counting the whole Mueller investigation, that ended in 2019, which is 6 years ago.